is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I should probably begin with an apology. Well, I don't know if I have to. I have to apologise. You decide whether I have to apologise to you or not. Rishi Sunak's speech yesterday offered a brief, and it turned out temporary, salve to our battered sensibilities. When he spoke, as he did in terms, I shall remind you in a minute, of a government that would have integrity, professionalism and accountability, I breathed a sigh of relief. I genuinely did. And I shall tell you why. I breathed it because although many of his policies were likely to be pretty toxic or repellent, I felt that those words, those three words, integrity, professionalism and accountability, spoke of a return to a pitch upon which we can all agree the dimensions. Do you see what I mean? Under Boris Johnson, we were not playing by any rules, any recognisable rules. It was very difficult for Keir Starmer to land a punch on him, because it was like trying to nail a blancmange to a wall with rubber nails. The absolute breach of all standards, regulations and requirements was tragic to observe. And I appreciate some people who fell for his shtick and are perhaps still under his spell will struggle to appreciate the sheer scale of the disaster visited upon democracy by a man who would lie as comfortably as the rest of us breathe. But not just lie, of course, actively seek to undo the requirements of parliamentary democracy, the standards, the ethics that are an unwritten constitution, but nonetheless the ties that bind our civilization, or certainly our parliamentary democracy. So Johnson ripped it all up. He would defend bullies. He would not just defend liars, he would amplify their lies. He became elected upon the back of egregious calumnies and proven nonsenses, and so it continued until it could continue no further. Oddly, the lie that finally did for him was the one about not knowing that a bloke he'd promoted had a record of inappropriate sexual behaviour. That oddly did for him, but it was a culmination. It was a classic case of the straw that broke the camel's back. But whatever your politics might be, if you dare, in any circumstances, to describe yourself as patriotic, you have to want the game to be played on a pitch that everybody agrees about, rules that everybody must abide by. A Labour MP is found to have behaved inappropriately. Keir Starmer suspends him immediately. You would want to conserve, even if you had your conservative scarf tied so tightly round your neck that your eyes were out on stalks, you should want a Conservative leader to do the same. It should not be the case that you want your team to be exempt from the rules and their team to be forced to abide by all of them. That's the point, right? That's the point. And politics is a dangerous and evil thing when the rules are treated with contempt. Treating the rules with contempt, treating normality and tradition with contempt, sees armed insurrectionists making their way to the Capitol in Washington on January the 6th of last year. That's not an exaggeration. That's what happens when major political figures treat the truth with contempt. So yesterday, when Rishi Sunak said what he said about accountability, about professionalism and about integrity, I allowed myself a moment of optimism.
This government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours.
And I don't think I am going to apologise for that, because it is a deep desire to see this country returning to something that resembles normality and decency that prompted me to allow myself that moment of optimism. I'm going to disagree with him about public spending cuts quite violently, but at least he's going to acknowledge the objective reality of integrity, professionalism and accountability. And then he returns Suella Braverman to the Home Office, which this time last week would not have prompted such a extreme response from me, because this time last week, if you'd asked me, and I don't think you did, this time last week I would have said to you that what she didn't appear to be that serious, and it looks to me as if Liz Truss has used it to essentially get rid of Braverman because they disagreed about immigration. Braverman is committed to reducing immigration. Liz Truss, for her myriad failings, understood that you can't really grow an economy if you're reducing the number of people contributing to it, or not at least prepared to increase it in areas where the need for more bodies, more workers is absolutely acute. So that was my theory last week. Oddly, Dominic Cummings, I think, said something similar, and I often think to myself, if I'm agreeing with that absolute skipfire of a man, then the chances are that it's actually correct, two extremes meeting somewhere in the middle. But I was wrong. That is not what happened. It was not a sort of face-saving exercise or a neat little bit of politicking by Liz Truss. It was a necessary reaction to an egregious offence. And it took a journalist called Tim Shipman, writing in the Sunday Times on Sunday, to make me or help me understand this. Now, Tim, who, in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you, has been a pal of mine for the best part of 25 years, is probably the journalist with the best contact in the Conservative Party. Certainly up until the latest iterations, the Truss and Sunak iterations, he had by far the best contacts. His two books on Brexit are seminal texts. They're absolutely definitive. And his great achievement is getting people to talk to him. People tell him stuff that they don't tell anybody else. I don't know how he's done it. I don't know that when we sat opposite each other 25 years ago, either of us would have expected the other one to end up where we have, necessarily, career-wise. But he is brilliant. And he has provided a definitive account of what actually happened and why it is so important. And it is this account that will lead me shortly to ask you what on earth Rishi Sunak is playing at. Whether he doesn't care about professionalism, integrity and accountability, or whether he doesn't understand why putting Suella Braverman back in the Home Office is almost overnight a complete dismantling of any grounds for the optimism that I described to you a moment ago. Let's begin at the beginning, if you didn't read the article. She said in her resignation letter that it was an accident, that her breach of the ministerial code, I'll say that again because, again, it used to matter and it needs to matter again. Her breach of the ministerial code was accidental. It was not. She deliberately sent 2 emails. Both of those emails constitute a breach of a ministerial code. She forwarded her own an email from her political account, from her ministerial account to her private account, and that ban is in place precisely because if you try to send something to someone outside government, a warning flashes up. I mean, it's anti-espionage, this policy in places, although I don't think anyone is actually accusing her of espionage, but it ensures that alarm bells ring in the event of a government minister sending government documents to email accounts that are not fellow cabinet ministers or fellow members of government. She said it was a minor document. That's not true either. It was a paper for a cabinet committee which had not yet met, about a policy that had not yet been agreed. So it's workings. It's confidential information about something that cuts to the very heart of government. It would have ended up as a ministerial statement, a written ministerial statement, which was part of her defence, but it wasn't approved policy. And that's important as well. She claimed that it was done at 4 o'clock in the morning after a long night's work. This is part of the accident defence. That's not true. It was sent at around 7:30, according to Tim Shipman's report in the Sunday Times. Her aides, Truss's aides, Elizabeth Truss's aides, and this is what I mean about him being a bloke that people talk to. Liz Truss's aides are adamant that she lied to the Prime Minister about this. She also claimed in her letter that she went straight to the Cabinet Secretary. Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times reports that she only confessed after Andrew Percy, whose aide was accidentally copied into the email exchange, went to the chief whip, who then went to Simon Case, the cabinet secretary. Lying about the time of an email is particularly stupid because, of course, anyone can see the time that it was sent. And now here's the really weird bit. She wasn't just sending stuff to her own Gmail account. She was then sending it on to an MP called John Hayes, who is a sort of rallying point for particularly right-wing Conservatives. She also intended to send it to John Hayes' wife, but accidentally sent it instead to Andrew Percy's parliamentary aide. He was he's a sort of mentor to right-wingers in the party, and Shipman reports rumours that she runs decisions by him before making them. I can't comment on the accuracy or otherwise of that. I can merely tell you that Shipman's reporting is absolutely first class and always has been. So there it is. The scale of Suella Braverman's conduct absolutely justified her dismissal by Liz Truss last Wednesday, was it? A week ago today, give or take, I think. And yesterday, Rishi Sunak brought her back after saying this.
It's a Labour Party, it's the Lib Dems, it's the coalition of chaos, it's the Guardian reading, tofu-eating, wokerati, dare I say, the anti-growth coalition.
Which just makes her ridiculous, not dangerous. What makes her dangerous on a moral or an emotional level is the fact that she boasts about dreaming of deporting refugees to Rwanda, a truly despicable intervention in British public life, the like of which we haven't heard or seen before, or at least not since Enoch Powell was shown the door by his Conservative Party leader. And, of course, it makes a complete mockery of what Rishi Sunak said shortly after becoming Prime Minister yesterday.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours.
So she lied about the offences that got her fired. She behaved with a complete absence of integrity. Her ludicrous comments about tofu-eating wokerati suggest that her relationship with professionalism is about the same as my relationship with playing scratch golf, i.e. non-existent. And the simplest notion of all, accountability, you will be held accountable for your actions, has been completely torched by the new Prime Minister on his first day in the job. So yes, I am going to apologise to you for expressing a modicum of optimism yesterday, albeit that it was sincere and it was in good faith and it was born of a patriotic thirst for a return to some semblance of good sense and stability in government, because what we have seen with the reappointment of Suella Braverman is that Rishi Sunak is every bit as bad as Liz Truss when it comes to competence, and every bit as bad as Boris Johnson when it comes to trustworthiness. And you can mock me and laugh at me and insult me for being surprised by that, but you can't knock me for being disappointed. Because if you don't want a return of some semblance of stability or good sense to government, then you're an idiot, regardless of what your politics are. I don't want your mortgage rates, thankfully, coming down a bit. He seems to have garnered some confidence when it comes to fiscal policy, when it comes to economics. But for goodness sake, if you could come in after, Mr. Blobby could come in after Liz Truss and effect an improvement in the market's confidence in the state of the British government. The rest of it, those 3 points, those 3 words, which actually warmed the cockles of my heart yesterday when I heard him say it. Integrity, professionalism and accountability have been completely torched within 3.5 hours of him uttering them by the reappointment of Suella Braverman to the Home Office. So I do apologise to you for being briefly and wrongly optimistic yesterday. But I'm afraid I would do it again, because I would clutch at whatever straw you offered me if it pointed to the possibility of a return to a political landscape upon which everybody agrees not only to abide by the rules, but also about the importance of the rules. 17 minutes after 10 is the time. So why has Rishi Sunak done it? 0345 6060 973. Some answers are obvious. She declared her support for him on Sunday afternoon when she had perhaps been expected to swing towards Boris Johnson, and that may have been a decisive moment. The idea that Brexit has brought this country so low that Suella Braverman becomes an important and influential political figure is a conversation for the ages. That's clearly part of what has happened here. But Sunak's calculation that he would put the woman who dreams about deporting refugees and lies about breaking the ministerial code back into the cabinet a week after she was busted, why would he do that? What does that say about him? And is there any case at all for telling me this morning to give my head a wobble and calm down, because this is nowhere near as awful as you, James, are portraying it as? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. And don't forget, 12 o'clock today, we have Rishi Sunak's first outing at Prime Minister's Questions. I don't know whether Keir Starmer will ask him how he could have appointed someone who has obviously not only breached the ministerial code in two quite egregious ways, but also lied about it blatantly. But I hope he does.
This is LBC.
Straight off the bat, the lawbreaker Rishi Sunak recruits someone who breaks parliamentary rules. Not just parliamentary rules, Peter, the ministerial code. He adds they are all rotten to the core. John adds, if I was ever going to vote for them, Braverman's appointment has stopped that. I eat tofu. I sometimes read The Guardian. She's in the role simply to satisfy the UKIP wing, to give them headlines every Saturday about immigrants and what should happen to them. So they've lost my vote until we have a serious Home Secretary. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. Mere hours after insisting that his government would have integrity, professionalism and accountability, Rishi Sunak appointed a Home Secretary, reappointed a Home Secretary, proven to have none of the above. Why did he do it, and what do you make of it? Carolyn is in Altrincham. Carolyn, what would you like to say?
When Rishi said his speech yesterday, I just felt this overwhelming sense of relief and happiness that we were back in safe hands. And it was totally blown by Cruella walking up the road of Downing Street. I thought, what on earth is going on? And it smacks of something really underhand going on, because not only is he now supporting the fact that she's broken ministerial rules, he's supporting that immigration rubbish as well.
I don't think he ever didn't. I don't think he ever came out against the Rwanda scheme. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer when it was announced, so collective cabinet responsibility. I don't know whether we naively think that because he comes across as quite personable, he couldn't possibly be supportive of vile and vicious policies.
I really thought that. And then it gets you to thinking, he was in government when all this was going on and never said a word. He went
along with all of it. He defended Boris Johnson. He was very much a member of the Got All the Big Calls Right brigade when the polar opposite was true. Why did we fall for it then, do you think, you and me?
Well, I have no idea, but I feel as though I have been completely duped now.
But it's an odd one, though. Why would he do it so quickly? I mean, possibly he had no choice. Maybe he'd sold his soul to her on Sunday afternoon in return for her support.
It smacks of a dinner at one of their subsidised dinners when he said, I tell you what, you resign, find a way to resign, you resign, bring Liz Truss down and get me in.
Gosh. I mean, who knows? In the absence of full explanations, I don't think that happened, because I think she was fired for a pretty gross misconduct, which she then subsequently lied about. So the idea that we've broken with Johnson's era of weaponised dishonesty, or even Truss's era of weapons-grade incompetence, has been knocked out of the park on day one. I genuinely don't understand it, because he doesn't seem to be stupid. He doesn't seem to be incompetent, and he hasn't previously seemed to be morally corrupt. Morally questionable, yes, because support for the Rwanda scheme is deeply immoral, but not morally corrupt, as in pretending that there's nothing wrong with lying. And like Carolyn, I feel very stupid for even briefly believing that he was going to return to respect or even reverence for integrity, professionalism and accountability. Thank you, Carolyn. From Carolyn to Colette. Colette's in Enfield. What would you like to say, Colette?
He did it because of the ERG. He did it because he needed to throw red meat to that side of his party. He did it because he would use her as a firewall. And like you, I thought it was a brilliant speech. I thought the grown-ups
it was all right. I used that phrase. I wish I hadn't. I'm still using it in the newspapers today. But we said what we saw. We saw the speech and we thought that there was an air of the grown-ups coming back into the room, didn't we?
by 8 o'clock last night, that had gone out the window for the simple reason that he has brought back Nadine Zawari.
Yeah.
He's brought back Gavin. I'm not doing it.
All right.
He brought back Gavin Williamson.
Sir Gavin Williamson to you, pal. And honest Bob Jenrick as well. Honest Bob Jenrick's back in the cabinet. That's the bloke who would... Yeah, well, you know who he is.
He's pulled the old gang together. And for me, as a woman of colour, I thought this was an Obama moment, despite the fact only 180 MPs voted for him, that the country didn't vote for him.
Yes.
But it all streaked away over the course of the evening. And for Suella to come back to cabinet, not any old job, but that job, I wondered what deal had been done, because it negated everything that he said at 1 o'clock. I'm horrified.
It was the speed.
Horrified.
It was the speed with... I mean, I could forgive a Jenrick or even a Williamson. I really could, because, I mean, they're idiots. And Jenrick, a lot of water has passed under the bridge since he overruled the local council to help a billionaire property developer save millions of pounds on a new property deal in East London. I mean, that's not ideal. I don't want people like that in British politics, but, you know, all parties have had scandals of various hues, and some of them are career-ending and some of them are not. But to do it in a week, to undo his promise about accountability, integrity and professionalism in mere hours, and to bring back Suella Braverman in mere days, I mean, why make the speech? Why promise that you're going to be honourable and then...
He must have had to have done it, because I can't.
But he didn't have to make
man.
the speech. It was like they're two people. It was like I watched Doctor Who last night.
No. He needed to do the speech. The speech was good. Let's leave the speech on the side, on the shelf.
Yeah.
But to bring her back decimated his own speech.
It really did, didn't it?
And it's bad, because I actually think, this might be a misnomer, he's intellectually intelligent.
Right.
He's not stupid. He's going to do the graft in the way that Boris just liked to turn up for the party but didn't want to do the shopping at Sainsbury's.
Yes.
He's a bright man. I'm not being patronising.
No, I understand.
And Suella is toxic and reflects a side of the Conservative Party that I just makes me go cold.
Yeah. Well, it makes me go cold too, and that's probably why there's so much... I don't know if embarrassment's quite the right word. There's certainly a lot of disappointment at allowing ourselves to feel briefly and mildly warm at 11:30 yesterday morning. By 4:30, of course, the shivers were back. Thank you, Colette. Dominic Raab, of course, back as Deputy Prime Minister. Mick says, please mention Raab. He was such a creep and sycophant of Johnson. He disappeared because of his lack of honesty and integrity. Look, I'm not going to defend Dominic Raab for you. I think the man's ridiculous. He lied about me on this radio station unchallenged, which has always struck me as a remarkable thing for a senior politician to be worrying about. A gob on a stick on LBC telling the unvarnished truth about Brexit. And of course, also lost the room slightly yesterday when he started talking about those Brexit benefits that 6 years later still haven't turned up. At some point, you're going to have to start wondering whether they're ever going to turn up, lads. But hey-ho, that point has apparently not arrived. But Dominic Raab's just rubbish. Staying on the beach and claiming that the sea was closed when Afghanistan fell is not evidence of moral corruption or an absence of integrity. It's just evidence of being a complete flump. I think his entire political career is revenge for the fact that the legal profession considered him to be ridiculous. He achieved so little as a lawyer. He seems to have dedicated much of his political career to attacking lawyers and laws. Because it's pathetic. He's also, of course, the son of a refugee who continues to agitate against refugees. So there's an awful lot going on with Dominic Raab. But, Mick, I disagree with you. And when it comes to the appointment yesterday that blows absolute holes in Rishi Sunak's claims to be a breath of fresh air, that drives a coach and horses through his claim that his government would have integrity, professionalism and accountability, it's Suella Braverman all day long. It's 10:30. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines.
#84850.
It is 10:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are, really marvelling, if that's the word. Thing is, I mean, if anybody cares, I don't know that any purpose is served by us becoming a sort of yin to the yang of someone like Richard Littlejohn. I don't know if you ever punish yourself by reading his columns in the Daily Mail, but he just hates everybody remotely associated with the Labour Party. Even if they're married to someone in the Labour Party, he'll be deeply insulting and, in the case of Cherie Blair, for example, misogynistic about them. And you know, this hope that some people in a party that you could never vote for are all right is kind of important. I think it prevents you from living a life of bitterness and bile, like a sort of left-wing version of Richard Littlejohn. Living on an unleavened diet of hatred and bitterness. And not just, of course, living on it yourself, but making your living or spending all your time on social media spewing up hatred and bile in the hope that other people will consume it. This might be an epic misjudgment on my part. It's certainly true that every time I offer up a few warm words about a member of the last 3 or 4 governments, events overtake me pretty quickly and they turn out to be fairly awful, or they turn out to have done something pretty grim. But then some politicians I admire from the other side of the house may in their lives have done things that I consider to be pretty grim. I just don't think there's much point in us spending 3 hours together every morning if all we're ever going to do is regurgitate hatred and bile directed at people who belong to a political movement that we don't sympathise with. So I may well run out of road soon. I think Rishi Sunak ran out of road yesterday. One thing that we haven't touched on yet is the sheer absence of talent to pick from. You know, anyone bringing Gavin Williamson and Robert Jenrick back into government, even as they bid farewell to the worst of the worst, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries most obviously. It's a bit like picking your team from a squad of 12 or 13. You know, you've got to put 11 people on the pitch. The big teams, the successful teams, have got squads of 30 or 40. Some of the teams in my team's league, the National League North, start the season sometimes with trialists in the programme. They actually appear in the programme as trialist A. They don't even get a name. I'm not quite sure what the reason for that is, and don't at me, my inbox is already going bonkers. But Sunak picking a team from a talent pool that is, well, a talent puddle, we should probably say. Rishi Sunak having to pick a cabinet from a talent puddle, a particularly thin talent puddle, actually. The kind of puddle that's left after 2 days of sunshine and no rain, a stubborn puddle, a stubborn and skinny puddle that has just managed to survive because it's shaded somewhere like a mushroom under a tree. Rishi Sunak picking an entire cabinet from one of the shallowest talent puddles in history. I'm not feeling sorry for the bloke. I'm just reminding myself that some of the appointments were probably necessitated by the shallowness of the talent puddle. But the Braverman one wasn't. Could have put anybody into the Home Office. Could have put somebody impressive into the Home Office if there are any impressive MPs. There was a bloke yesterday, a Conservative yesterday, I hadn't come across him before. Jacob Rees-Mogg insulted him in the House of Commons. Now he's back on the back benches. I mean, he said some sensible and intelligent and well-informed stuff in the House of Commons. But if I check what his name was and say it on the radio, it'll turn out that he is not worthy of warm words or support. So do you see what I mean? It would just be so boring if every single day we became the righteous equivalent of a Daily Mail column and spent albeit that, of course, the racism and the misogyny and the homophobia that typifies so much of right-wing politics must be called out. There are people on the right wing who do not subscribe to the racism, the misogyny and the homophobia. But they do all currently subscribe, it would seem to me, to the corruption of integrity, to the abandonment of accountability, and to the absence of professionalism. And those were the 3 things Rishi Sunak promised he was going to fix. And for an hour and a half, I believed him. Did you? And if so, or if not, why on earth did he bring Suella Braverman back? And what does it say to you about the road ahead, about the Sunak premiership? The fact that Suella Braverman, having been fired for absolutely appalling behaviour, is back in the Home Office a week later. Just had a text, I don't know if you heard my phone buzz, a text off a mate who is a political journalist to tell me that the Conservative MP I was just referring to is indeed a bit of a wombat. So, hey-ho, QED, 10:40 is the time. Ruben's in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
I mean, my like you, I think that the Braverman appointment is definitely the worst of the bunch. When I saw the announcement last night, it definitely shocked me. But my first thought was that it must have been planned in advance. I know you're a bit sceptical about that, but I just thought maybe Rishi's been playing the politics game better than we thought. A couple of weeks ago, everyone thought that Penny Mordaunt was the PM in waiting after her speech.
Listen. It can't have been planned in advance because Suella Braverman did terrible things and then lied about it.
Well, I can see what you're saying, but at the same time, she didn't before she made that speech about wokies and tofu-eating Guardian readers.
No,
you know,
there hasn't been a plan
after that.
If he'd got 200 MPs on the list before Sunday afternoon, she wouldn't have had to come out in support of him. She wouldn't have had any leverage. They have not planned this. You're just going to have to trust me on that, Ruben. You're going to have to take the metal colander off your head and trust me on this one.
No, I believe what you're saying. I just think if, as you say, if it's not planned in advance, then why on earth would you appoint someone after everything that happened in the week running up to Liz Truss resigning?
Because he lied in his speech. He was lying in his speech. He was making because he promised her the job when she came out in support of him on Sunday. That bit was planned in advance, but only from Sunday. And he has swallowed his commitment to integrity, professionalism and accountability by putting a woman possessed of precisely none of the above back into the Home Office 1 week after she was fired for behaving abominably and then lying about it. That's all that's happened. I mean, and in a way, there's an ineluctable pragmatism to it. That was the only path to Downing Street that Sunak could see in front of him that avoided a ballot in which Penny Mordaunt might have done well. The only path he could see, his best chance of getting there without a vote being put to the membership, was to accept Braverman's support in return for whatever she asked for. That's all that happened on Sunday. I'm just surprised he did it.
In that case, does her support make that much of a difference? Could it not have been someone else? Did he not have well over 100? And could it not have been anyone else?
No, because she was very close. Because she brings a lot of the right wing with her. I mean, she brings the ER, not the whole of the ERG, because little Marquis Francois, of course, made a speech about how they weren't going to actually endorse either. But she, with her determination to reduce immigration, and although I can't accuse her of racism, racists love her. But you can see it on Twitter. They absolutely love the way she talks about deporting, dreaming. It's not just having support for a policy that would remove refugees to Rwanda. It's dreaming about it that racists love. That is, they'll forgive anything if someone expresses themselves in such horrible terms. So they love her, and that is what she delivers. She delivers that wing of the party and of the support to Rishi Sunak.
But will that unite the party?
No.
Because what is he going to be able to control her? I mean, what is she going to come out with next?
Well, there is a great question. That is a brilliant question. And in fact, to return to the Sunday Times, the doyen of political journalists among my generation, Tim Shipman yesterday was being contacted by various Conservative MPs expressing absolute horror at the Braverman reappointment. I mean, there may be an argument that it proves he's got some ruthlessness, political ruthlessness that some people lacked. But Shipman reported last night security sources regarded Suella Braverman as loose-lipped even before the events of last week. And he wonders, as you do, what not just what is going to go ahead in the future, but what is going to come out now that they're looking into it. Here's a quote from a source. A number 10 source was withering. She doesn't make any decision without consulting John Hayes, who had been acting as an unofficial advisor, frequently seen in the Home Office. Meetings which had come to the attention of Matthew Rycroft, the permanent secretary. Concerns had been raised prior to Wednesday that Braverman might have been sharing restricted government documents with people she shouldn't have, a source told the Sunday Times. Braverman then agreed to resign. So why has Sunak done it? Simple answer, solely to get the keys to number 10. But how much has he sacrificed in return for those keys? We're about to find out, or we are now finding out, I think. clarify on Rishi Sunak and the despicable Rwanda deportation scheme. Here he is talking with Andrew Marr on LBC back in July.
What needs to be changed on our immigration policy?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we make our Rwanda policy work. Now, I voted for Brexit for many reasons, but in part because it gave us the ability to control our borders. And I say that as someone who's proudly from a family of immigrants.
A lot of people say a family of immigrants. You're the last person that should be driving people off to flying them off to Rwanda, particularly when they're vulnerable.
It's actually the opposite. This country did something amazing for my family, and it welcomed them as immigrants. We do need to have control of our borders.
And he has, of course, now trumpeted the professionalism that will typify his government. Here's the woman that he made Home Secretary yesterday, a week after she was fired for egregious breaches of the ministerial code.
This figure of 50 billion doesn't have any legal basis whatsoever. It's been manufactured, and it doesn't seem likely that there will be such a bill for £50 billion. It's part of Project Fear. Health warning, don't believe it. We pay into the European Investment Bank, and so actually we're going to get a windfall from leaving. So I think that the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. We have a lot to gain. Our best days lie ahead, and we're going to be enjoying the freedoms and enjoying the benefits that we gain from leaving.
As of July of this year, the Treasury's estimate of the financial settlement when the UK left the EU, or the windfall, as Suella Braverman calls it, was £35.6 billion. A windfall generally means credit, not debit, right? If you get a windfall, you're better off than you were before. Suella Braverman seems to think that a £35.6 billion bill, and growing, of course, is a windfall. So she clearly doesn't have the first idea what she's talking about, but she dreams about deporting refugees. Well, why has Rishi Sunak trashed his early claim to care about integrity, honesty, professionalism and accountability for this particular politician? Wendy's in Sandhurst. Wendy, what would you like to say?
James, I'm angry. I'm furious with myself for being duped yesterday.
Gosh. Well, don't be. It comes from a good place. It comes from a good place. It comes from patriotic thirst, is what I call it, Wendy.
I thought it's okay. It's Rishi. Okay, he's going to do something to help. He's an intelligent man. It's going to be fine. He's going to try and dig us out of this hole, and it's okay. And then, bam, there she is. There she is, walking down Downing Street with that smirk on her face. And I thought, oh, God, it's the end. It's the end. It's the end. It's same old. Bring next. Who's next?
Meet the new guy.
Bring him on.
Meet the new guy. Same as the old guy. I think you were warmer than I was. I knew that we were going to have some pretty toxic policies when it comes to refugees and spending cuts, of course. And there will be arguments about the necessity or otherwise of the latter. But the analogy I'm sticking with is that I thought we were going to go back to an agreed set of rules by which everybody played. And we haven't, have we?
Yeah.
We haven't.
No. There's one set of rules for certain people, another set of rules for other people.
Johnson put Priti Patel straight into the Home Office after she'd been fired. She'd been fired by Theresa May for lying to her, and then left her in the Home Office after she was found by his own independent advisor to have been a bully. And this, bizarrely, Sunak has started with an almost textbook blueprint of Boris Johnson's conduct towards a Home Secretary.
Yeah. So I rest my case. Same old.
It is.
Same old. Nothing changes.
Nothing changes.
No. I'm so angry. My heart's going like the clappers, James. It's going like the clappers.
Well, let me.
I'm so angry.
I don't want your heart going like the clappers. Do you know what my Facebook did yesterday?
No, what?
Oh, actually, I shouldn't. I just probably needs a trigger warning. But it recommended something to me that was really chilling. It made me very conscious of the dangers of the heart going like the clappers. I shall share the details with you shortly, but I need to double check a couple of details first. Anyway, I'm here. Do you want me to calm you down, Wendy?
Yes.
Would you like, for example...
Tell me it's all going to be okay,
No,
James.
I can't tell you it's all going to be okay.
They're all going to push off.
But I can tell you that Nadine Dorries is no longer in the cabinet, and she is now pursuing a new career as a television presenter. And I am in the very privileged position of being able to demonstrate to you just how well she's doing. Would you like to hear this?
Fabulous.
Here you go.
Let's
This is Nadine Dorries trying to present a television programme.
Coming up on tonight's programme, for a change, a man who is going to clear up a woman's mess. That's Rishi Sunak as he enters number 10. As you were, Sunak's stability extends to the cabinet with the big beefsteak and all cages, but Braverman back at home in the Home Office. Sorry, I've just completely messed up. They're in our studio and we've risked them for a clue. Stick around for Just Stop Oil live.
There you go.
Has she been taking lessons from Liz Truss?
I don't know who she's been taking lessons from. Thank you, Wendy. A lot of women ringing today. I put it probably because we are talking about a female politician. Cam's in Norwich. Cam, what would you like to say?
Oh, my goodness. Hello, James. You've also got another shaking woman at the end of the phone, not just because I'm talking to you, but because I've got so much to say and I don't know where to start.
Well, take all the time you need. Take all the time you need.
Okay. Well, basically, like many people, I think I woke up yesterday with a positive attitude, trying to keep an open mind, just thinking, will the next 2 years be tolerable rather than infuriating and a return to what we've just dragged ourselves out of? And I'm afraid by lunchtime, the hope was back in the box.
Yeah.
Why do you think? Where to start? I think the appointment shows as much about Sunak's weakness as it does about Braverman's incompetence, and he's just clearly on a leash from the ERG still. The party hasn't changed. If that's what it takes to be unified, then nothing is any different, and we are going through the same old Tory party rat-eating rats scenarios. It's just not what the country needs right now.
How long before the circular firing squad starts again? Let's be purely pragmatic, right? Let's see it as his job.
Yes.
This week.
Yes.
This weekend was to get himself into Parliament, to get himself into Downing Street, by hook or by crook.
And can I stop you there?
Yes,
because I thought on Sunday.
You sound like Jeremy Paxman. Go on.
Don't get me started. I love that man. But anyway, on Sunday, my instincts were that Sunak was in cahoots with Johnson. They were trying to strike some sort of dodgy deal.
Right.
My heart sank if he brings Johnson back. You know, God forbid. But anyway, the cahoots have been done with the ERG. So what does that say about his judgment?
No, but I'm asking you to set aside thoughts about his judgment and focus solely on the mission to get into Downing Street. And he has done it by hook or by crook, which from one angle, it's not an angle I look at it from, but from one angle, that's successful. That's good politics.
That's politics. But listen, if he brought Braverman back, and I think it's really important here that we put her revolting ideology to one side here, because that's playing into exactly what she wants. And Starmer has to avoid that at the dispatch box today, because if he goes down that route, he'll have wokerati thrown at him, he'll have tofu eating, Guardian reading.
Does that land? I mean, we're a bit of an echo chamber on stuff like this, because I can't quite imagine anyone being stupid enough to enjoy that sort of political rhetoric, but presumably there are people who do.
The flag wavers do, and I think if you're a patriotic flag waver and you want planes flying off to Rwanda, then where do you stand on national security? Where do you stand on somebody who has clearly breached so many lines? I mean, let's not even mention the incompetence, because, again, that's playing into personalities, and they would use that as, you know, she's breached national, you know, she's a security risk. She's not fit to do the job. And therefore, that in itself, with Sunak making that judgment, I think it's day two. And I'm afraid it's not looking good.
It's really not, is it? And of course it leaves us wondering what Rishi Sunak actually stands for or believes in. Fiscal competence, stability are relatively vague terms, but we have a fairly clear grasp of what they mean. Beyond that, is he actually passionate about anything? Does he believe in anything? Does he believe in precisely the sort of bilious policies that Priti Patel and Suella Braverman are pushed forward by the Conservative Party to promote, or does he share some of these horrific views, or does he care about different things? I honestly don't know. I mean, who is he? We tried to find that out yesterday, and of course the longer this conversation goes on, the more ridiculous all of us feel about being very briefly tempted, if you like, to tempted into hope. We're back to that wonderful line in Clockwise, uttered by John Cleese's character. It's not the hope. It's not the despair that gets me. I can cope with the despair. It's the hope.
On your radio. On Global Player and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock. Labour have accused the Foreign Secretary of being shockingly tone deaf after he suggested LGBT football fans should be respectful of the host nation if they attend the World Cup in Qatar. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell says the government should be challenging FIFA on how they've put fans in the position of having to travel to a country where homosexuality is illegal. Earlier, James Cleverly told LBC Qatar is willing to make compromises.
They want to make sure that football fans are safe, secure and enjoy themselves, and they know that that means that they are going to have to make some compromises in terms of what is an Islamic country with a very different set of cultural norms to our own.
Rishi Sunak is facing calls for an official inquiry over his reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary 6 days after she was sacked for a security breach. The Liberal Democrats have demanded a Cabinet Office investigation, and Labour has raised concerns over national security. The Northern Ireland Secretary will hold talks with leaders at Stormont later as a deadline for calling another election in the region approaches. If no ministerial executive is in place by Friday, the UK government assumes a legal responsibility to call another election. Bosses at Heathrow now think it will take years for passenger numbers to return to pre-pandemic levels. The UK's largest airport reported a loss of £442 million over the 9 months to September, and is expecting to carry a quarter fewer passengers than 2019. The chief executive, John Holland-Kay, has told LBC there are a number of reasons for the slow recovery.
The world is still getting over COVID. There are still restrictions in some countries. It's partly also just the economic conditions. We're facing into possibly a global economic turndown. We have the war in Ukraine. All of these things just act as a bit of a brake on full recovery.
Just Stop Oil activists have sprayed orange paint on the front of Ferrari and Bentley's car showrooms in Mayfair. The Mets arrested 2 people on suspicion of criminal damage. In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading down 33 points at 69.80. The pound buys $1.15 and €1.15. The weather, sunny spells for most of the UK, scattered showers in the north and west. Heavy, possibly thundery rain crossing Scotland will mostly clear by the afternoon. Windy but staying very mild, a high of 19 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Holly Harris.
Anyone can fall victim to a scam, but the Bank of Santander is keeping customers safe with an earworm.
You can't touch this. Scams seem real. It's hard. Makes me say, oh my lord. Scams and fraud stressing me. Put my mind on crime and my money. You don't need to say much, cause this account, you can't touch. Stop. Scammer time.
Meanwhile, Santander takes scams very seriously and advises you to stop and think before parting with money or personal details.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Three minutes after 11 is the time. Very good morning to you if you're just joining us. The Home Secretary is still Suella Braverman, although given by the timbre and tone of calls to this programme this morning, I wonder how long that is actually going to be the case. They will hang on like Billy-O. I have to tell you that. The normal circumstances, an early mistake could probably be absorbed and moved on from. But when you're taking over from the mother of all early mistakes, Liz Truss, you can't really admit it. Never explain, never apologise. But we shall watch with interest. I'm slightly taken aback by the comments I just heard from James Cleverly in the news bulletin there. I missed them earlier when he was talking to Nick. But the idea that football fans are being told to compromise when they if they do go to Qatar for the football. I mean, what is he saying exactly in that? I mean, a bit of flex and compromise at both ends. It can be a safe and secure World Cup. There's a rather good journalist who works for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, writes a column for the New European as well, a chap called James Ball. He points out, given that the honest answer here is LGBT fans were thrown under the bus by FIFA when Qatar was given the World Cup under incredibly dubious circumstances, Cleverly is quite limited in what he can reply. But even so, this ain't great. What would stop them from putting the boot into FIFA? I don't know. Anyway, there are conversations clearly to be had about the looming World Cup in Qatar and what meaningful response to some of the pungent homophobic policies that place has in place to come. We will move on to that possibly later in the week. But I want to talk next about something that I've confided in you recently about my worries. That sometimes when the really crazy stuff is happening on the fringes, and I'm very lucky in that I have quite a big Twitter. I like Twitter, and I have quite a lot of exposure, even though I curate my space very carefully. But I always think of the block function on Twitter like a horse's tail. If you are, after a while, you don't notice that it's swishing anymore. You're just getting rid of the flies that are buzzing around your bum. And so if you are bothered on social media by organisms that like to consume excrement, then the best thing I can advise you to do is to get so used to blocking and muting. I say this to new colleagues when they arrive here. I say, think of it as a horse's tail. And how often does a horse know that it's swishing its tail? Because the last thing you want is any of those flies that are buzzing around your bum to start bothering your face or your head. So just give your tail a swish and get rid of the flies. I mean, ideally, you'd have some sort of canister in place that would sort of pump noxious fly-killing fumes into the atmosphere, into the environment. But even though I swish my tail quite regularly on Twitter, a bit of an uptick lately, actually. There's clearly some bot-based action going on. You can usually tell an account was set up in September 2022, and all it does is tweet footage of CCTV footage of crimes being committed by people who aren't white, because, of course, no crimes are ever committed by people who are white. You can spot these accounts from a mile off, and I remain of particular interest to these sort of characters or these sort of whoever it is that creates these armies of fake accounts. But I still have quite a lot of exposure. I still, in the spirit of research, I quite like to see what these people are up to. I tend not to ring me anymore, for example. I was thinking yesterday about the bloke who famously called me to tell me that he'd voted for Brexit because there were too many brown faces in his local Sainsbury's. And as a direct consequence of that vote, of course, he now has to suffer the horrors of having, presumably the horrors for him, of having brown faces in pretty much every major office of state, something which I welcome, even though the individuals concerned are pretty repellent. I still think, despite a lot of people trying to argue me out of it yesterday, I still think it's an objectively good thing to have diversity in cabinet, even if the cabinet is pursuing policies that are anti-diversity. There's probably some cognitive dissonance going on there, and I'm sure it is a subject that we will return to again in the future. But keeping an eye on what the really nasty people are up to, keeping an eye upon what the real weirdos are up to. I think we missed a trick a bit with the anti-vax stuff. Maybe I'm doing myself a bit of a disservice there. It's 8 minutes after 11. Can we clear the board, please? I'm not going to be talking anymore about the appointment of Suella Braverman. I'm going to need these phone lines for the next conversation that we're about to have. You don't know what it is yet, so stay tuned. Maybe I do myself a disservice. We went in quite early on the anti-vax nonsense, and the anti-vax nonsense oddly has a crossover with the thing we're going to talk about next, which I have noticed in the course of the last month. And I mentioned to the producer yesterday that we might talk about it today. And I didn't fully have the confidence to draw from the sewers of social media the conclusion that this is something that we should talk about. But then James Kirkup, who is the director of the Social Market Foundation and writes some, I think, rather good columns for The Times whenever Daniel Finkelstein is away, James Kirkup picked up on precisely the point that I was fretting about yesterday in his column in today's Times. And the headline above his column is this: Sunak must act fast to soothe populist rage. Now, what does that mean? Perhaps there's a clue in the second line of the headline. The likes of Nigel Farage are trying to direct anger over the economy towards, quotes, globalist, end quotes, technocrats such as the new PM. Now, Farage, of course, is a man who also spoke once about the Jewish lobby being too powerful or being very powerful in America. And I have always, when I've come across this word globalist in recent months, and it is only in recent months, would you believe, which is why I worry sometimes about giving it oxygen in its early days, because the oxygen may help it grow. But wherever I've come across this word globalist in the context of populist rage, it has pretty much been either a synonym for anti-Semitism, the idea that there is a powerful cabal of Jewish people, very rich Jewish people, secretly running the world, which of course was a bigotry that got the last iteration of the Labour Party and its leader into large amounts of trouble. Or just, if they're applying it to Rishi Sunak as they are doing now, a sort of, they might not be Jewish, but they're still not white type of subtext to the use of this word globalist or globalism. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. And it's Kirkup's piece in today's Times that has really focused my mind upon this. Because there's also an excellent article in The Atlantic that I've retweeted this morning. If you follow me on Twitter, at Mr. James O.B., there's a really good piece by an American writer about the state of Britain. It's not a happy read. It's not a pretty read, I have to tell you. But you know my commitment to the idea of Robert Burns's poem, the one, would some power the gift he give us to see ourselves as others see us, which suggests the importance of seeing yourself as you are seen from the outside. The article in The Atlantic talks about how the UK became one of the poorest countries in Western Europe and details how actually a decade or so of austerity, or it was half a decade really of austerity, created the perfect environment for right-wingers in this country to serve up to anxious voters a menu of scary outsiders, bureaucrats in Brussels, immigrants, asylum seekers. In that way, the actual decision-makers who had kneecapped British competitiveness, according to this writer, managed to avoid responsibility for their own actions. He writes, a cohort of older, middle-class, grievously nostalgic voters demanded Brexit, and they got it. And there it is. I mean, a fairly neat distillation and description of precisely what happened in this country in 2016. The right-wing media and the right-wing politicians served up anxious voters a menu of scary outsiders, bureaucrats in Brussels, immigrants, asylum seekers, in order to avoid responsibility for the decisions they'd actually taken, most obviously austerity. And that was what kneecapped British competitiveness. Brexit made it worse, which of course Rishi Sunak nor Liz Truss can be honest about. And it led grievously nostalgic, older middle-class voters to demand Brexit, and they got it. So that's why it's important, because the same forces that allowed liars and racists to pretend that the state of the country in 2016 was somehow the fault of immigration or foreigners are now moving to this word globalist, which has deep and long anti-Semitic connotations, but it goes further, I think, in the modern iteration. This ancient slur that clever Jewish merchants and bankers held power over kings and presidents can, of course, extend beyond rich, powerful Jews who run things for their own benefit and become instead, as James Kirkup writes this morning, rich, powerful Jews and non-Jews who run things for their benefit, not mine. And therefore it came as no surprise whatsoever to learn this week that Nigel Farage has been using the word rather liberally in his pronouncements. Not that anyone really notices his pronouncements much anymore, unless they cross a threshold, unless they breach a level of decency that he's been dancing around for his entire life. So there's some other elements to it as well. I've noticed the World Economic Forum is coming in for a kicking all the time from often precisely the same sort of people who think that COVID-19 was a hoax. I may review this position, but at the moment I don't really take calls from complete weapons. I know that they would go viral, and I know that viral clips made me, quotes, famous, end quotes, or whatever word you'd prefer, infamous, ubiquitous, but I don't really think it serves any purpose at all to give platforms to complete weapons. Whatever it is you want to be a weapon about, whether it's claiming that vaccines are secretly designed to control the population, or whether it's claiming that there's a cult of satanic paedophiles at the heart of the American establishment, or whether it's claiming that the World Economic Forum is trying to, I don't know, undermine something or other. It's like, I know you do your own research. I know you do all your own research, and there's loads of evidence on the internet that you're right, but you're wrong and you're a weapon, and I can't be bothered to talk to you. So the question I want an answer to today is quite precise. Anyone can ring in to answer this, but I'm only interested in your answer to this question, right? What does globalist mean in the context of these conversations that are now popping up all over the place? What does it mean? Is it fair to suggest that it's just a slightly broader iteration of the old anti-Semitic trope that Jewish bankers and merchants are actually secretly controlling the world, and the extension of it to Rishi Sunak is simply evidence of the fact that the bigotries and the hatreds, though still racist, are not confined to anti-Semitic racism anymore. But if a country like the United Kingdom ends up with a brown prime minister, then people nodding and winking towards these ancient tropes and these ancient hatreds are secretly celebrating. It's going to be a hell of a lot easier to convince people that a brown Englishman is secretly acting against their interests than it is to convince them that a white Englishman is. Maybe I'm completely barking up the wrong tree on this. There's a first time for everything. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I thought I got that right. I always get that quote wrong. Oh, the gift that God could give us to see ourselves as others see us. I thought it was the power. Oh, the gift some power could give. Anyway, no matter. My Robert Burns education continues apace. My globalism education starts now. What does the word globalist mean, and why is it popping up all over the place? Or at least, why is it popping up a lot in the sort of places that also talk about anti-vax or vaccines being fraudulent, or the World Economic Forum being a force for bad? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And here is an example of a weapon. I hope I'm not doing you a disservice, Andrew in Herne Hill. Perhaps you are sending me a tongue-in-cheek comment, but this is the sort of thing I mean. Dear James, you're overlooking the fact that Rishi Sunak is a member of the World Economic Forum, which is committed to destroying the economies of the Western world. If that's tongue-in-cheek, it's good, because it's so close to the bone that I think it's not tongue-in-cheek, it's actually from a real weapon. That's the kind of person that I haven't got time to talk to today, because there's no point showing the light to people who are determined to live their lives in darkness.
This is LB 6060973.
Is it possible to have too much of a good thing? We have probably seen more of Theo Usherwood in this studio in recent days than we have since Theresa May was trying to get Brexit through the House of Commons. I am far from saturation point. I still have a huge capacity for more Theo, as I know you do as well. But I do find myself wondering what prompts the latest visit to the
I'll
studio.
keep it short and snappy.
No, don't keep
so
it short
that,
and snappy. Take your time. Well,
So,
I mean, yeah.
No, you never say that, James. Right, just very quickly. On Monday, we were due to have the medium-term fiscal plan announced by Chancellor in the House of Commons. That was, of course, undoing the damage that had been done from the mini-budget of September the 23rd. It's now been put back, and actually it's been upgraded to a full autumn statement. It's going to be taking place on the 17th of November. We have a statement, which was actually a cabinet readout, saying that the Chancellor, that's Jeremy Hunt, updated the Cabinet on the timing of the fiscal event. The Prime Minister and Chancellor agreed that the fiscal event would now take place on the 17th of November and would be an autumn statement. He said it is important to reach the right decisions and there is time for those decisions to be confirmed with Cabinet. The autumn statement will set out how we will put our public finances on a sustainable footing and get debt falling in the medium term, and will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility. And they reiterate the statement that the Prime Minister and Chancellor fully support the independence of the Bank of England in their efforts to return inflation to target.
Any responses yet? I mean, do you know? Have you seen the market's response to this? I don't think it would spook them.
No, I think that's
because the game has changed now.
Exactly. And James cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, teed up this delay in the fiscal event, the autumn statement, when he said this morning that he expected it to be pushed back so that Rishi Sunak could make any changes that he wanted to. But you're quite right to say that with the appointment of Rishi Sunak, the election of Rishi Sunak as Conservative leader and Prime Minister, that's brought a calmness to the financial markets, and that's given them the manoeuvrability to delay the autumn, to delay the medium-term fiscal plan.
And it's going to be a bigger deal than it would have been on Halloween, and
a much bigger deal.
Obviously, spending cuts and tax rises are possibly both on the agenda. So we will find out the
Thursday,
full details.
the 17th of November.
The full details of that imminently, and you'll be joining us again
at PMQs,
which is Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer.
It's going to be a good one.
Oh, you're so excited!
I'm almost as excited as last week. In fact, I'm probably more excited. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting one, especially because afterwards, Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, has an urgent question in the House of Commons on the appointment or reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
Thank you, Theo. We shall see you shortly. Jeremy in Derby writes, James, until I heard that disgraceful racist speaking to Sangeeta at the weekend, and she told him off for using the term globalist, I had no idea it was an anti-Semitic phrase. Call me naive, but I'd assumed it was used as a sort of opposite to nationalist. People who only care about their country try to use globalist to slur people that take a more global view, who believe that countries need to work together for the better of all. Nationalists, of course, try to say that you can't possibly love your own country while working together with others. I hear you. Quite a few people making similar points. This is good from Christian in Norfolk, and then we'll hit the phones. Mike in Hackney's up first. The word globalist has been in common currency on the right of American politics for some time. I believe it was Pat Buchanan who pushed it into mainstream US politics in the 1990s. It's a term of abuse. It suggests that anyone who dares to call for international cooperation is somehow a traitor to the homeland. This is nothing new, of course. Stalin used the term rootless cosmopolitans, and yes, it was in reference to Jews. Farage is not the first to use this term, as it is a cheap populist hard-right trope that winks at prejudice. He won't be the last, says Christian. And in fact, as James Kirkup's excellent piece in the Times today points out, some are deploying a new word to capture and channel that anger. Globalist. Unused in British political conversation a month ago, it has been imported from the US by the likes of Nigel Farage. It's meant to denote a politician whose loyalty is to international institutions and ideas rather than to the people or the nation. And that, of course, is where the echoes of anti-Semitism kick in, because the argument, the central tenet of the most base anti-Semitism is that the loyalties of Jewish people are to each other wherever they may live and not to the people with whom they share a land, a country, a town, a city, a village at this moment. So what does the word mean to you, and why has it popped up in the last month in perhaps unsurprising corners, but many corners? 26 after 11. Mike's in Hackney. Mike, what can you tell me?
Hello. So thanks for having me on the show, James. I'm very familiar with this word, unfortunately, because I have a weird history. So I'm from Hungary, but okay. I grew up with a bunch of people from the United States for various reasons in Hungary. And so I've heard this phrase being used by the Hungarian far right for a very long time with Viktor Orban and a lot of people. And it's kind of a mix of both worlds, in my opinion. A lot of it is to do with against nationalism. However, there's a lot of Hungarian propaganda, for example, that specifically uses globalist in the context of, for example, billionaire George Soros, who's obviously a far-right American favorite of hate, and also Hungary happens to have been born in Hungary. So it's used a lot in the context of the European Union in Hungary as well, because as kind of a destroyer of national sovereignty, if you will, that's kind of the...
And a creator of domestic problems as well, isn't it? I mean, that's the crucial bit. So when there's financial crises or when there's recessions that have been caused either by circumstances and or events, or in the case of this country, have been caused by policies, have been caused by austerity, post-Brexit and pre-Brexit political decisions, the people who promoted and made those decisions are probably more desperate for a scapegoat now than they were before the Brexit vote.
No, absolutely. And this, we can see that in Hungary very well. So Orban has a lot of connections to the US far right, actually, even before he got elected. I forgot the name of the political strategist. You can look it up, but he was running a bunch of campaigns for American Republicans in the 80s and 90s, and he hired him to do his bidding in the late 2000s. So in the financial crisis, there was a lot of talk of globalists, talking about the IMF, talking about the economists who were bailing out Hungary and
when I mean it's an old song, isn't it? Just with slightly new lyrics, a very old song with slightly new lyrics. And when I look at some of the ludicrous claims here about the thing is, I don't know about you, Mike. I know a couple of people that work at the World Economic Forum, and the idea that they are either embarked upon a mission to take over the world or remotely capable of taking over the world is objectively hilarious. I'm going to message one after this.
Ridiculous.
But that is the claim, that the World Economic Forum is determined to introduce some sort of one world government.
It's a classic fascist trope. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. Unfortunately, seen the exact same thing happen in Hungary in the 30s. It's a very common thing. People look for a scapegoat, and obviously anti-Semitism openly is not in vogue anymore, in the sense that you can't really get away with it.
Farage, I think, when he was talking to Alex Jones not long ago, talked about the Jewish lobby being very powerful. So these people do flirt with the overt fascist tropes, but we thankfully still just about live in a country where that won't be tolerated too much.
Hungary can get away with this, right? So they try, and what they do is, again, they kind of mix together the classic trope of Jewish people being kind of globalists and against national sovereignty, and they want to impose your rule on top of impose their will on top of your nation. And they use it also in context of, again, intergovernmental organizations that the country happens to be a part of, and they have to obey their rules, because that's how international agreements work. But they use that same trope.
If only we could rid ourselves of everybody who's not ethnically pure or ideologically pure. If only we could rid ourselves of all of those people, our country would flourish once more.
Absolutely, and it's always in a negative context. It's the EU. EU is imposing refugees on us in Hungary. It's the EU that now imposing sanctions on Hungary, even though they're not really doing that. They're imposing sanctions on Russia, which is a whole other ballpark. But they use the same exact thing. They have entire the other one that's favored in Hungary is Brussels, which is again useful used in the UK as well. Like Brussels, which means the shadowy, unelected bureaucracy of the EU, and obviously there's a lot of anti-Semitic tropes there that are kind of, I think, being co-opted, implanted onto this. Yeah, exactly.
That's really helpful, Mike, actually. Thank you. I'm sorry you're so well qualified to talk about it in a way, because you've been exposed to it firsthand, but it all makes perfect sense to me. And if you haven't read this article in the Times, not Mike, he doesn't need to, but for the rest of us, it's a perfect introduction to it. And after the news, I'll address the question of why it matters, or indeed, why should the toxic anger of fringe elements on Twitter and the online comment sections of newspapers matter to this country and to both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer? I think the answer to that question is close to obvious, given what's happened in the last few years, where the toxic anger of fringe elements on social media and the online comment sections of newspapers have somehow managed to grab the steering wheel and indeed propel people like Suella Braverman into the Home Office itself. But I'll give you a really neat account of why it matters and why it's a problem for both Sunak and Starmer after the very latest news headlines with Holly Harris.
The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has announced Monday's fiscal statement will be delayed until the 17th of November to ensure the government makes the right decisions for the economy. It's also been upgraded to a full autumn statement and will be accompanied by a forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Labour has been granted an urgent question in the Commons to ask Suella Braverman about her reappointment as Home Secretary a week after she resigned for breaching the ministerial code. It will take place after Rishi Sunak's first appearance at Prime Minister's Questions. Campaigner Peter Tatchell has accused the Foreign Secretary of colluding with a homophobic, sexist and racist regime. James Cleverly's confirmed he will be attending the World Cup in Qatar and has advised LGBT football fans planning to go to be respectful of the country's culture. The weather, sunny spells for most of the UK, scattered showers in the north and west, heavy, possibly thundery rain crossing Scotland, but mostly clear by later this afternoon. Windy but staying very mild, a high of 19 Celsius.
This is LBC.
Right now at B&Q, get 3 for 2 on all coloured emulsion, including paint mixing, and 4 for 3 on laminate and luxury vinyl click flooring. Make home feel like yours for less. Shop in-store via the app or at DIY.com. You can do it. Excludes flooring accessories and products sold and shipped by verified sellers on DIY.com. Ends 31st of October, subject to availability. See DIY.com.
Our pledge is to put more money in the public's pocket.
What about my household bills?
Feeling that cost of living crunch? Lebara are here to help. 3 gigabytes of data, EU roaming included, and no annual price rises, all for just £5 a month. Lebara, more for less. Change or cancel anytime. Rated excellent on Trustpilot. Buy now at lebara.co.uk. Terms apply.
Everything is more exciting when it's electrified. And now the Nissan electrified lineup is here. Whether you're you'll find a Nissan to match your feeling. Search Nissan Feel Electrified and book your personalised test drive with the experts in electrification. Join us at the Feel Electrified event between October 8th and November 8th at your local Nissan dealership. Test drive subject to availability.
An elevated travel experience awaits as Singapore Airlines brings you Australia, New Zealand and beyond on board the world's most awarded airline. Enjoy an unforgettable experience with incredible service and warm hospitality. Flying to Australia from just £973 return. Book your 2023 trip today at singaporeairlines.com. Singapore Airlines, a great way to fly. Book by 7th November. Terms apply.
Is boiler cover worth it? As a British Gas engineer, I get asked that a lot, and I always say yes. In the past year, we've been called out to fix over 1.8 million boilers, and repair bills can be hefty, but with British Gas boiler cover from just £2.50 a month, you can count on us if things go wrong.
Get a little peace of mind from costly repairs from just £2.50 a month. Search British Gas boiler cover. British Gas, here to solve. Terms and exclusions apply. Availability 98% of UK mainland.
I value a name I can count on.
And there's loads of reasons to count on Vanguard. 1.
45 years of investment experience.
2.
30 million investors worldwide.
3.
3 years of being a Which recommended provider for SIPs.
And 4.
4 years of being a Which recommended provider for investment platforms.
We're counting on Vanguard Value.
Can we count you in?
Vanguard. Value to investors. Capital at risk. Tax rules may change. Eligibility rules apply.
Love animals. Love Bearkind bamboo socks. Printed with endangered animals. For 20% off 5 pairs or more, search Bearkind bamboo socks now.
Maybe your stamps are on the table next to the birthday card you forgot to send. Or in that random drawer full of pens, pennies and paper clips. Or stuck to your fridge behind a year-old to-do list and a magnet from Malaga. Or maybe, just maybe, they're neatly placed in a completely sensible spot. After the 31st of January 2023, regular stamps without a barcode will no longer be valid. So if you know where your old ones are, use them up or swap them. For more info, visit royalmail.com/barcoded stamps.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
36 minutes after 11, we will indeed be hearing PMQs today live, as a couple of people have just asked about. We do every week these days. Where have you been for the last few years? Since Theo Usherwood demonstrated his brilliance at talking us through it and analysing it and picking the bones of it. We've rather enjoyed taking it live. There's certainly no plans to stop doing that while the political landscape remains so volatile. So in answer to that question, why does it matter? Because if you don't spend, enough time online, you may be wondering what on earth this word globalism or globalist has to do with Sunak and Starmer, or of course you. Why should the toxic anger of fringe elements on social media and the online comments sections of newspapers or these weird new TV stations that call themselves anti-woke, why should it matter to the country and its leaders? Here's James Kirkup's answer, the director of the Social Market Foundation. Well, for much of the 2 decades before 2016, Britain, like America, was run by clever technocrats who just did what worked. They looked at the evidence, listened to the experts and the institutions. They didn't think enough about or of the angry people on the internet writing in capital letters about immigration and illegal wars and the EU and the World Economic Forum. So we got Brexit and Trump and Corbyn, and politics went from BBC Two documentary to Netflix docusoap. It's beautifully put. That's why it matters. Another example, of course, of the horseshoe in global politics. But what does the word mean to you? Why is it popping up so much in the last few weeks? Carly's in Birmingham. Carly, what would you like to say?
Hiya.
Hello.
I believe that globalism is a updated version of the original Nazi doctrine of Jews, the Jewish community working in tandem to bring down Western global influence and Western global dominance. And they've accused globalists today of doing this in sort of the same way, but that the Nazis did. By destroying the economy, promoting foreign economies, and more so today, globalists will argue that
people using the word globalist as a pejorative will argue that.
People using the word globalist will argue that international immigration is being pushed by globalists, but specifically non-white immigration into white countries. And they will say globalists are doing this to bring down Western democracy and
why do they want to do that? Sorry for my ignorance, but I'm on a learning curve today. Why do the globalists want to bring down Western democracies?
Because they want to establish, similar to what the last caller said, they wish to establish a global government. So they'll also use.
Why do they? I know. Probably if we were pushing these people, there would, as there always does, come a point where they just say, "Well, me." But I mean, you know more about it than I do. Clearly, why do the globalists, these mythical globalists, want a one world government? What will they gain from it?
I think that it's a kind of like visceral response to an idea of foreign imperialism. So the idea of foreigners.
So they just want to take over for the sake of taking over, like the Daleks.
That's it. A bit like the Daleks, yeah. They just wish to take over, and that they're using all these tactics, and these tactics seem to be everything that people who argue that globalists exist seem to dislike, such as transnational organizations.
It's beautiful, isn't it, almost? Anything that is happening that you don't like, it's all down to those globalists.
Exactly, yeah, that's it. So everything they don't like is down to globalism. And where anti-Semitism comes into this is that the strongest believers of this will say, and globalists are controlled by the Jewish community. That's that's where it eventually goes to. And that's why it's kind of an updated version of the Nazi doctrine, because the Nazis basically convinced themselves and their supporters that everything bad that was happening economically in Europe and the world was being run by the Jewish community that ran the bank.
And, speaking of the Nazis, it was, of course, the granddaughter of Hitler's finance minister that invited Nigel Farage to address the AfD in Berlin 5 years ago. And he is one of the reasons why this word globalist is back in the news today. And he, of course, when he was addressing the far-right AfD, said that... Julie's reminded me of this quote, and I had to actually double-check it was true. He said, once you're able to speak the unspeakable, people will begin to think the unthinkable, and that's kind of a fairly neat illustration of what it is all about.
And similar to Nazism, Nazism didn't go straight to building concentration camps. The first camps were actually built in 1942. It had to be kind of dropped into the German nation and the German community that, to say this is acceptable. Now we can say this. Now we can blame them for that.
Speak the unspeakable. We can begin to think the unthinkable. And
exactly,
and there it is.
So for Nigel Farage, by starting that the EU was trying to, create a European government, he kind of allowed that language to be introduced into European politics, all across Europe, not just in Britain.
No,
so it'll just like
that's why the granddaughter of Hitler's finance minister invited him to Germany to address her party. And that line there, the populist anger that shook up politics, won't go away just because the big parties are led by, quotes, grown-ups, end quotes again. It could get worse. The relationship between economics and populism is complex. But an economy facing recession, where clever technocratic leaders have to impose fiscal pain on voters amid falling living standards, is, well, it's a pretty good breeding ground for precisely the sort of political poison that you describe. Thank you, Carly. It's one of those days where I'm a little bit embarrassed about knowing so much less than my callers about something. I'm supposed to be the one that does this for a living. Carolyn's in Battersea. Carolyn, what would you like to say?